Hi guys, we're here with Weldon Green. He's currently the coach of G2, and we're also here with Parth Naidu, the current head coach of TSM. I'm the owner of
nice
TSM.
To meet you.
Hi, yeah, good to see you.
Hey, nice to meet you for the first time.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
All right. Since you've been now working for G2 for a split, and you work with us for a split, what are some of the differences in working for both teams?
Well, I mean, if we compare regions or we compare teams, I think one of the biggest differences obviously is TSM was I don't want to say monocultural, but it was all monolingual. So it was all English speaking, native English speaking, and Soren and Dennis basically, had high levels of English. And then in G2, it's a lot more bilingual. So there's a big challenge with trying to explain, concepts in monolingual environments. And then I think North American LCS is just, I don't know if it's because of the big players in the scene or the amount that people are striving to kind of catch up, but it seems really professional and really structured. Like the players have given away more of the power to the orgs and the staff and the coaches to try to get things done. And in EU, the players are still more dominant, and so the coaches play a little bit more of a minor role, I think, in structuring the teams.
So how much of the stuff that you did with TSM have you also brought over to G2? Like, do they do the notebooks, the gratefulness, do they do all of that, or is it more like, no, we're EU, we don't do that?
Oh shit!
We got to the gratefulness. We didn't get through like as much of the acceptance and commitment ideals, partly because of the language, partly because the structure. So I just made it much more applied to what we were doing on a daily basis. I think the biggest difference is the position coaching. Because obviously, like, I think that's not an EU NA thing. I think it's just that with TSM, it was like I was 100% dedicated on trying to figure out that position. So it was like 16 hours a day, right? Fully focused on TSM. And now I'm back in EU and I'm working on my own company on the side. So it's half-time G2 and half-time with the company. And so that means that I can't supervise the position coaching like I would want to.
Last year when we worked with TSM, we already had like an established leader in Bjergsen who's been around for a long time, and a lot of what he brings to the team is like the authority from like the player perspective. So coaching alongside him and working with the team is a lot easier. Whereas you have Perks, who last year was like the rookie that everyone's looking at, but then MSI happened, and then it feels like he hasn't really reached that peak, or he hasn't like transformed into the player that everyone was expecting him to be. So what do you think it's like coaching those two different types of players, and what do you think of Perks, and do you think that he's going to be like a Bjergsen later on? Do you think he's going to go on a different path? What do you think?
I mean, personal development is hard, right? Because a lot of it comes down to your individual experiences, and I think Bjergsen was able to experience, kind of like the success of joining a pro team, and then, going to NA, and then the success of winning a split, and then failure, and then, oh, actually I want the next level, and then, committing himself to that. So you go through this progression where you just want the thing that you haven't achieved yet, which is like, oh, I want to win a split. Oh, okay, I did it. But you don't really try very hard for Worlds, and then all of a sudden you fail there, and you're like, oh, now I really want that, and you taste it, and you taste defeat there. And so you go through this progression where you get kind of more and more dedicated to these higher and higher ideals. And I think that I didn't really need to do much work with Perks when I got onto the team, because he had already, he'd succeeded in winning a split, and then he succeeded in kind of like getting to Worlds, and then he failed there, and he felt that, and he saw how close he was, from the scrimmages, and then failing on stage, when he really wanted to succeed. And I think that is a key experience to draw on for motivation. And so, I mean, you saw him in the spring split this year, he was playing much smarter, and he was much more dedicated. And I think in training, he reminded me a lot of, what it's like to train with Soren, when he's just really committed to perfect play and smart play, and trying to bring it to the next level, because he knows that, what he really wants is to win Worlds or win a big international tournament, and it's not good enough to just be the best in NA or the best in EU anymore. I think the biggest difference working with Perks versus Soren is that I think that Soren's like a little bit more perfectionistic, which has pros and cons, because it means that everything is a little bit more planned out and a little bit more rehearsed and a little bit more driven. But then, when things start to go bad, it's a lot harder to just fly by the seat of your pants when you're a perfectionist. So if I was going to say like their personality differences and that come out in their play, that's what I would say is the biggest difference for me.
So you're saying Bjergsen plans more, but it's harder for him to react to a scenario when it goes poorly.
Yeah, unless he's visualized that, and then he's prepared for it to go poorly, and then it's fine.
Got it. So in 2016, TSM had a lot of issues with their shot calling. I mean, with their poor performance in Spring Split, and then we had Double F pick it up, and he started to do a lot better. But overall, like going into Worlds, it still wasn't something that we figured out completely. What's the difference between like the shot calling aspect of like TSM and G2?
I think so. It was really fun working with Peter and Soren because they were like a really fun duo, and they were so decisive. I mean, when they knew what they wanted to do, they knew that they wanted to do it, and they drew everybody to that play. And I think Peter talked a lot about how he learned that, in his time at CLG and from Aframu a lot about decisiveness. So I think that is definitely something that I haven't seen on a lot of teams. And for the biggest difference I think in G2 is that, Yoon is just such a leader tactically and strategically. He's got such a brain, and I think it's really different to have shot calling out of the bottom lane in the first part of the game versus shot calling out of the jungle in the first part of the game. So I think that, Trick has a really clear idea of what he wants to do on the map and how he wants to do it. And, his decisiveness is maybe not as unilateral as Double F's was, but it's pretty strong. So that feels like the biggest difference between the two clubs for me.
Is it like so on TSM there's like two guys that are vocal that would always discuss and argue and try to figure out a solution? Is it more collaborative over at G2, or is it pretty similar where like there's just two leaders and they try to figure it out?
That's a really good point. I think that is a big difference too, now that I think of it, because it's just really loud in the G2 house compared to, and maybe because the TSM house is so much bigger and airier and lighter, but and we scrim during the day, instead of at night. Thanks NA schedule, we're forced to play our games at like 8 p.m. But yeah, everybody's just going at it, and everybody's involved really intensely. Maybe a little too intensely sometimes in the post-game review, and trying to figure out like what's right and the best way to draft for it. So that's really exciting. Although it's much more chaotic and it's harder to direct. So I feel like the effectiveness of growth and the effectiveness of learning is much harder to measure, and that worries me because then sometimes I don't know if we're actually getting better or not, objectively.
I actually prefer the way where everyone is collaborating and included, and everyone's focused on how they should improve the team. I don't like over on NA. I know TSM we try to have all the players involved or pay attention.
Yeah, you don't like it when somebody checks out.
Yeah, but I think that's really holding our region back. I think a lot of the bottom teams, they don't even do review effectively, and then on TSM, that's the goal, but we're always struggling, So I think that's a big part of why the West isn't as good. I think that like if a team wants to be able to compete at Worlds and do super well, every player needs to understand the game at a high level. And generally on all the top teams, even in the West, most of the time it's like 2-3 players that really understand it at a high level, and the other guys have solid mechanics.
What do you think of the biggest difference between like LCK scrim structure and the NAEU, where they have this big 3-hour break between the blocks where they actually review one of the games from the morning? Do you think that that's just a big superiority in their way that they review that leads them to always be better, or?
I mean, we kind of had a conversation about why we think Korea is better right now, like they've been better, and it just goes down to culture. It sucks to say, but the Korean players have a better work ethic than the players from Europe or North America, and they just, North America, it's not like our players don't work hard. It's just that the Korean players give up so much more to achieve excellence, They dedicate like every waking moment to the game. From a practice standpoint, it's also a lot easier for Korean players to reprimand their players, right? There are so many talented solo queue players in Korea, and even the players in solo queue in Korea take it a lot more seriously. And just say if Cooney was messing around, he didn't care, he didn't put an effort into review, he was being lazy, Koma can just be like, Cooney, you're benched. And they would still have the same result with or without him. Maybe having Hooney would help SKT win 5% or 3% faster, but Hooney's not special in Korea. In North America or in Europe, just say hypothetically if Sven or like, you know, a top player or whoever, or even a player on TSM, they were tacked out, it's a lot harder actually to be like, to say, hey, you're gonna get benched if you continue to do this. It has to be a process, and then you also have to be able to find a player that's suitable for the replacement too. And the talent's not nearly as, I wouldn't say big because we have a pretty big player base compared to Korea, but the overall competitive talent isn't as high quality.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with me.
No, I fundamentally 100% agree with you, because I think it's so hard to bench somebody in NA or EU because they'll just go to the next team where they get to be, you know, on the starting roster. I think of all the coaches in the world that understand why it is that you bench a player, I think Koma, you know, is clearly doing it for the right reasons. You know, the first player he ever benched was Faker, you know, and so he realizes that the bench isn't something that you do for a lower underperforming player because they're sucking and you want to find somebody better. It's something you do to control mentality and drive, you know, and so he did it with his best player, which I think is kind of the opposite of what other maybe EU or NA coaches that I've seen have tried to do with the bench, where they use it as like a swap out role for somebody that they think might be questionable.
So we made a conscious decision to, you know, work with a complete English speaking roster. What's it like working with two Korean players, and yeah, what's it like?
I think I think this was actually a big debate in the ULCS earlier in the year, brought up by one of the Unicorns manager, just about monolingual rosters. And I think Splice struggled with this too, because they had a full Danish-speaking roster, and then they wanted to swap out one of the players, so they had to convert to English. And they had a challenge there. Personally, as a coach, it's been a struggle, obviously, because you have to pare down the complexity of the ideas, and then it takes longer to get through topics, and you aren't sure if they're translating well. And of course, then you have to work with a translator too for some things, which is fine. And then of course, the players want to study the language, so then that takes away time from their training when they're studying the language also, because they're studying English, you know, so they want to be better at English, so then they have less time to solo queue. And so I think that there's pros and cons. I really think it just depends 100% on how much time you have to build up synergy, because my opinion is that a lot of the communication in League of Legends is like, you could, if you relate it to like memes is a single word that carries like a big breadth of meaning around it. So if you come up with a word that means a whole complete tactic, and everybody understands what that word means, then you can say something very briefly. You don't have to explain it fully. So if you have a whole year, you know, for example, like G2 has had an entire year with this roster, then now they're able to communicate, you know, really complex topics in the game fluidly, because they have words that mean all of these things. And so regardless of their ability to converse, their ability to share information in the game is, you know, transparent, but that can only happen throughout, you know, a lot of time. And so if you only have, I don't know, let's say you swap rosters for a summer split and you want to do well at Worlds, well, then having a bilingual roster is going to be a challenge.
What about from like a culture perspective? Do the Koreans help the other players work harder, or how's it like? Because I know that I was talking to the owner of P1, and literally we were in Vancouver, right? And they just put the 3rd and 4th place match, and right after the 3rd, 4th match versus P1 versus FlyQuest, right? Ryu and Arrow, they went back to the hotel, and within an hour they were playing solo queue again. And so I was surprised. And they've always been like good performers. Arrow was on KT, Ryu was on HTK, which did really well at Worlds. And so does it have like a really positive effect on the other players, or do they just work just as hard anyways?
Yeah, I think it definitely rubs off. I mean, we saw this with Soren. Like Soren came in with this EU kind of work ethic, right? This Danish, I'm gonna scrim 10, 15 games a night, you know, after, or I'm gonna solo queue 10, 15 games a night after scrims, you know, sometimes. And maybe that gets a little abusive if you stay up too late, but I was amazed at his ability to pump out solo queue games. And I think that, you know, that affected his teammates. And so I think it's actually individual more than it is cultural. I think that there are lazy Koreans, and I think that there are really hardworking North Americans. So I think if you have that person, and that's just who they are, then they influence the people around them by being a kind of a non-verbal leader.
Do you find it easier just to be working for a team and not working for the business, where you could just go hard, like 16 hours a day on one thing? Or do you find it better if you're like multitasking and doing different stuff? Because I definitely couldn't do the latter.
I think it's really hard to multitask, and I want to just focus on the thing that I want to focus on. And the thing is that while I have a passion for elite performance, and I think I'm good at it, my real passion is to save an entire generation of like amateur gamers from wasting their time trying to go pro. And I don't mean that they should stop. I mean that all of the time they spend training to go pro and like looking up to their idols that are pro athletes and spending their time training to get better at a game should be useful. They should get transferable skills out of that experience. They should compete. They should be coached. They should actually benefit from it instead of, you know, maybe training League of Legends for 6 years really intensely and then failing to go pro and then losing all of that time and just being wasted time spent in their basement. You know? And so that's kind of my drive. And so because I'm single focused on that, then the kind of side hustle of trying to also win with G2 is not as much of a, it's not so frustrating, you know, that I can't spend 100% of my time with the team as I was able to with TSM.
And then, would you work for a team that wasn't already like say G2 or TSM? Would you think that'd be more challenging or interesting, or would you rather not? Or like,
it would be really fun. Yeah.
Why don't you? Because it seems like an interesting challenge.
Because the best teams always offered better deals. I think they have a little bit more money because they're the best teams. So it's like really, that's just a really practical economic thing, you know. But also like, I was a huge fan of Hotshot GG, sorry, Regi. You know, back in the days when it was TSM Snapdragon and the odd one, and so it was really fun to work with CLG. And when they spurned me and didn't hire me full time, which is fine, you know, I actually said you shouldn't hire me because it'd be too much money for me to come to LA. It was really satisfying to go to TSM and beat them. So that was more like an emotional thing. And then for G2, like it's just, I've loved Carlos ever since I watched him, you know, build his brand at Assault World, kind of like how I was watching you guys as streamers. So for me, it's been always a dream to work with him. And I had a conversation with him last October, 2016. Or no, it was November. It was November, and it was really inspiring how focused he is on becoming the best. You know, he wanted to be the best player, and then he's, okay, I'm a CEO, I want to be the best CEO, you know, so that was really cool. So it was more like the person I want to work with than the org. Like a lot of respect for you, and I had a lot of respect for George, and I had a lot of respect for Carlos, and that's what I want to do, is work with people who are inspiring to me.
Even though you're on G2, you have a lot of TSM fans still, so is there anything you'd like to say to them?
TSM.
Nice talking to you, Weldon Green.
Nice talking to you guys.
All right, see you
Pleasure
back
to
in
see
LA
you.
soon.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Bye.
All right, bye.